Every love story begins somewhere. Every heartbreak leaves a mark. Welcome to Stories That Stay With You. Welcome to House of BL Stories. People ask me all the time, what's the hardest part about being famous? And I always used to say the schedule, the way your whole life gets carved up into 15-minute blocks and handed to other people to manage. Or the loneliness. That specific kind of loneliness that only exists when you're surrounded by 100 people and none of them actually know you. Or the performance of it. Not the stage performance, I could do that in my sleep, but the constant, daily performance of being a version of yourself that's palatable enough to be loved by strangers. I used to say those things and mean them, but that was before. Now, if you ask me that question, I'll tell you the truth. The hardest part about being famous is that you never know, not really, not with any certainty, whether the people closest to you are there because they want to be, or because someone is paying them to be. His name was Kael. For 4 months, he was the closest person in my world. He stood between me and every threat, every crowd surge, every dark corner of every unfamiliar city at 2 a.m. He was the last face I saw before I walked onto a stage, and the first face I looked for when I walked off. I trusted him with my fears, my worst nights, my weakest moments. I trusted him with my body, with the parts of myself I'd kept locked behind glass for years, untouchable, preserved in the careful distance I'd always maintained from everyone around me. I trusted him with everything. And the whole time, he knew. Let me take you back, because you need to understand how it happened. You need to understand how a person can be so completely, catastrophically wrong about someone and not see it coming, not even once. I spent a long time thinking I was stupid, or naive, or broken in some fundamental way that made me easy to deceive. But I don't think that anymore. I think I was just someone who wanted to be loved so badly that I forgot to ask whether I deserved the version I was getting. My name is Ren. Stage name, Renzo. I've been performing since I was 16 years old. 3 albums, 2 world tours, 1 very public breakdown in a Tokyo airport that my management team repackaged as exhaustion and buried under a wave of carefully timed press releases and a limited edition album re-release. I was 23 when all of this happened. 23, which sounds young, until you realize I'd already been in the industry for 7 years. 7 years of early mornings and late nights and green rooms and interviews and smiling for cameras when all I wanted to do was disappear. 7 years of being told what to wear, what to say, how to stand, which version of myself was most marketable this quarter. 7 years of Dominic Park, my manager. 41 years old, impeccably dressed, the kind of man who speaks in a register so calm and controlled that you always feel slightly off balance around him, like you're never quite sure what he's actually thinking. He found me when I was 16, pulled me out of a regional talent competition, sat across from me and my mother in a diner booth, and laid out a vision for my life so precise and so confident that my mother signed the contract before the coffee arrived. He built my career. That's true, I won't pretend otherwise. But buildings can be prisons depending on who holds the key. The letters started arriving in October. At first, management flagged them as fan mail. Intense fan mail, sure, but the industry has a high tolerance for intensity. You get used to a certain level of obsession when you've been in the public eye long enough. People project things on you. They build versions of you in their heads that have nothing to do with who you actually are, and then they feel entitled to those versions. It's uncomfortable, but it's part of the landscape. Except these letters were different. They knew things, not general things, not things you could piece together from interviews or fan forums, specific things. The name of the hotel we were staying at in Seoul before it was publicly announced, the layout of my dressing room in Osaka, the fact that I sleep with 1 lamp on because I've had insomnia since I was 19 and complete darkness makes it worse. That last one stopped we cold. I hadn't told anyone that. Not in any interview, not in any behind-the-scenes content. I'd never even mentioned it in passing. And someone knew. I brought it to Dominic. He read the letters carefully, all of them, and when he looked up, his expression was measured and serious in the way that Dominic does everything. Measured, serious, and completely unreadable. He said we needed outside security, Private, personal, close protection level. Someone assigned specifically to me, around the clock, separate from the standard venue teams. He said he already had someone in mind. I didn't ask how. I was scared enough that I didn't push back on anything, which I now understand is exactly the point. Kael came in on a Tuesday. I was sitting in the conference room of our management offices, still in rehearsal clothes, eating a protein bar because I'd missed lunch again, when the door opened. I don't know what I expected, some generic security type, big, blank, efficient. Kael was tall, dark jacket, dark eyes, the kind of stillness that some people are just born with, not the stillness of someone who is calm so much as someone who is constantly, quietly alert. He moved into the room like he'd already mapped it, like the exits and the sight lines and the potential pressure points had all been cataloged before he'd even fully crossed the threshold. And then he looked at me. Not at Renzo, not at the album covers of the tour posters framed on the wall behind me, not at the version of me that existed on streaming platforms and magazine covers. Just at me, like I was a person he was meeting for the first time and hadn't already decided what to think about. No recognition hunger in his eyes, no calculation, just attention, clean and direct. He crossed the room and held out his hand. "I'm Kael. I'll be your close protection officer for the duration of the tour and as long as the threat situation requires. I need you to be completely honest with me about your routines, your fears, the people around you, and anyone you have doubts about. The more I know, the better I can do my job." I shook his hand. I said, "Okay." And somewhere underneath the fear and the exhaustion and the low-level anxiety that had become my permanent baseline, something loosened slightly. Just slightly. Just enough. The first week was rigidly, uncomfortably professional. 3 steps behind me everywhere. Shows, rehearsals, fittings, press junkets, restaurant dinners I barely ate, hotel lobbies I walked through with my head down. Always present, always watching, responding to questions with the minimum number of words required, and volunteering nothing. I found it irritating at first. My life is noise. Crowds, conversation, the constant low-level chaos of being managed. A person who exists quietly in your orbit without performing anything at you feels, initially, like a challenge, like a door that won't open no matter how you try it. But somewhere in the middle of the first week, irritation became curiosity. I started noticing things. The way he positioned himself differently depending on the venue layout. Closer in cramped spaces, wider in open ones. The way he scanned a room not once, but in rotating intervals like a continuous background calculation. The way he drank his coffee black and finished it quickly before it went warm because he wouldn't allow himself to be occupied with something hot in his hands when he was working. Small professional details that I couldn't stop cataloging. We were in Osaka when the wall cracked for the first time. 3rd week of the tour, post-show, 2 in the morning, that specific window after a performance where the adrenaline is still burning, but there's nothing left to burn it on. I couldn't sleep. I never can after shows. The white noise app, the melatonin, the breathing exercises, none of it was working. I opened my hotel room door because the walls were starting to feel close. He was sitting in the corridor outside, back against the wall, one knee bent, reading an actual physical book. He looked up when the door opened, not startled, he never startled, just shifted his attention from the page to me. "Can't sleep?" "Never can after a show." He looked at me for a moment, then closed the book. "There's a vending machine 2 floors down. They have those canned coffee drinks, the ones that taste like someone described coffee to a chemist who'd never actually tasted it." I stared at him. "You want to walk down with me?" he said. It wasn't warmth exactly, more like a practical solution to a practical problem. Person is awake, person needs somewhere to put their energy, here is a low-stakes option. I said yes. We rode the elevator down in silence and stood in front of the vending machine in that particular quiet that only exists in hotel corridors at 2 in the morning. He fed coins into the machine and handed me a can that was slightly too cold, and we stood there drinking bad canned coffee under fluorescent lights. Then he said, out of nowhere, "I watched a documentary last week about anglerfish, the ones that live in the deep ocean. The males are a fraction of the size of the females. When they find a mate, they literally fuse to her body. Their organs merge. They share a bloodstream." I looked at him. "That's horrifying," I said. "I know. I haven't stopped thinking about it." I laughed. Not a performed laugh, an actual laugh, the kind that surprises you on the way out. He looked at me when I laughed. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly, more like recognition, like he'd been watching a door and it had finally opened an inch. I told him about the model trains. I don't know why. Something about the hour and the bad coffee and the strangeness of standing in a hotel corridor in Osaka with someone I barely knew loosened something in me. I told him about the HO scale collection I'd kept from age 9 to 15, how I could tell you the manufacture and production year of every locomotive I owned, how my mother sold them when I was 15 because we needed rent money, and how I didn't blame her, not really, but how I'd never quite gotten over it. How it was the first thing that ever belonged specifically to me that the world took because the world needed something from us. He listened. He didn't offer comfort or pivot to something more comfortable. He said, "That's the kind of loss that doesn't look like much from the outside, but it stays. The small ones always do." Just like that. Like it was obvious, like of course that's what it was. I stood in that hotel corridor and felt for the first time and longer than I could remember like someone had actually heard me. Not heard Renzo, heard me. I should have been more careful with that feeling. I should have recognized it for what it was, the most vulnerable I'd been in years handed to someone I knew for 3 weeks, someone whose entire function in my life was professional. But I was tired and lonely, and someone was leaving letters in my dressing room that knew which lamp I kept on. So I held on to it. The letter in Fukuoka changed things. We were 6 cities in, and I'd started to breathe slightly easier. The letters had stopped, or at least none had surfaced in 2 weeks, and the daily rhythm of having Kael around had shifted from surveillance to something else, something I didn't have a word for yet. Then the stage crew found one. Inside the venue, past the exterior security, past the backstage access points, past the sweep that had been done that morning, tucked under the mirror in my dressing room, weighted down with a smooth, flat stone, like some kind of deliberate, horrible calling card. Kael was in the room before I fully processed what I was looking at. He had the letter out of my reach before I could touch it. I watched his face as he read it. And something happened there that I never seen before and haven't seen since. It was fast, barely a second. Then the mask was back, smooth and unreadable. But I saw it.
Not shock. Something more like recognition. Like he was reading something he'd been told to expect and finding that it landed differently than he'd anticipated. I didn't know what that meant then. I know now. He handed the letter directly to Dominic without letting me read it. Dominic looked it over with that measured expression and said they'd escalate the security protocol. His hands were steady. His voice was calm. He didn't look like a man encountering an unexpected development. He looked like a man watching a plan unfold. I missed it completely. After Fukuoka, the distance between Kael and me started to change. The 3 steps became 2, then sometimes 1. He started learning my rhythms without being asked. Green tea before shows because he'd noticed I reach for it when my hands won't stop moving. A jacket kept in his bag because I get cold in air-conditioned venues and he'd noticed I never ask for what I need. He knew which reporters made me tense, which vocal warm-ups I did before a show, which songs cost me the most to perform and left me hollowed out afterward. He paid attention, the deep, sustained kind that most people in my life were too busy to offer. And I fell. Slowly. The way you fall when you don't realize the ground has been disappearing beneath you until you're already in the air. I had a panic attack in Seoul, second one that month. We were 40 minutes from showtime and something just broke. No warning, no escalation, just the world narrowing to a pinpoint and my lungs deciding they'd forgotten their function. Kael cleared the green room in under 30 seconds, and then he sat down on the floor across from me, not hovering, not crowding my space, and said, "Look at me. Just my face. Nothing else right now. Just this." I looked at him, and slowly the room came back. The air came back. He talked about bioluminescence for 20 minutes, creatures that generate their own light in absolute darkness. His voice was low and unhurried, and exactly what I needed without knowing I needed it. By the time he finished talking, I was okay. He held me up, his hand on my arm, brief and steady. "You've got this." I went out and performed to 12,000 people.
And the entire show, in the back of my mind, I was thinking about his voice in that green room, the specific quality of his presence, the way being near him felt like pressure equilibrium, like my nervous system had decided he was safe in a way it had never decided anyone was safe before. I knew it was a problem. I knew, in the clear-eyed part of myself I was working very hard to ignore, that what I was feeling had crossed every professional line, that it was probably unwise, probably complicated, probably something I should dismantle before it grew any larger. But knowing something is a problem and being able to stop it are not the same thing. Not even close. It was the night after Manila, the second to last city on the tour. We'd had a free evening, rare enough that I didn't know what to do with it at first. No show, no press, no obligations. The rest of the team scattered. Mika went to find food. The label reps went to a rooftop bar I didn't want to go to. I ordered room service and sat on the floor of my hotel suite with my back against the couch, the way I always sit when no one's watching, and Kael knocked at 7 instead of midnight. Night's quiet. Thought I'd check in early. "You don't have to stand in the hallway all night," I said. "Come in." He hesitated for exactly 1 second, then he came in. We ate the room service food sitting on the floor, which seemed to mildly offend his professional instincts, which he adapted to without comment. We talked about everything and nothing. His childhood in a city I'd never been to, a younger sister he spoke about with a softness that sat completely at odds with his usual composure, the way he'd ended up in private security through a series of events that he described as less a plan and more gradual narrowing of options. "Did you always know you wanted this?" He thought about it. "I always knew I wanted to be useful. The shape of it changed." "And now?" He looked at me. "The shape of it keeps changing." Something in the room shifted, the way air pressure changes before a storm. I was aware of the distance between us, aware of the way he was looking at me, not the professional assessment he defaulted to in public spaces, but something slower, something that had been building for weeks in the silences between us, and now, in the specific privacy of this room, was running out of places to hide. "Kael," I said, not asking anything, just saying his name. He set down his water glass. He looked at me for a long moment with an expression I couldn't fully read, something careful and something unguarded existing simultaneously in the same face. "This is complicated," he said. "I know. I'm supposed to—" "I know," I said again. He reached across the distance between us and touched my face, just his hand against my jaw, thumb at the corner of my mouth, like he was learning the edges of something fragile. I closed my eyes. "Tell me to stop," he said quietly, "and I will. Nothing changes. Nothing is different. Tell me to stop." I opened my eyes. "Don't stop," I said. What happened after that was, it wasn't like what I had imagined. And I had imagined it, I won't pretend I hadn't, but the reality of it was different. Slower, more deliberate. There was a quality to the way he touched me that felt like he was paying attention to every detail and filing them away somewhere careful, like I was something he'd been entrusted with and refused to be careless about. I had spent years being perceived, watched, observed, consumed by audiences who thought proximity to my image meant proximity to me. But that night, for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt known. Not Renzo, not the voice, not the brand, not the product. Me. Afterward, we lay in the dark, and he kept his arm under my shoulders, and I listened to him breathe and felt something I hadn't felt in so long I had almost forgotten it was a real thing a person could feel. Safe. I felt safe. He pressed his mouth to my temple at some point in the quiet, and I heard him exhale, slow and careful, like he was putting something down that he'd been carrying for a long time. "Get some sleep," he said. "You're not going back to the hallway," I said. A pause. "No," he said. "I'm not." I slept. For the first time in months, I slept without the lamp on. What grew between us after that was real. I know it was real on my side. I have to believe, I need to believe, that it was real on his. He stayed, not just in the room that night, but in whatever that night opened between us. We were careful in public, professional in front of the team, and I don't think anyone noticed, or maybe Mika noticed and stayed quiet, which would make sense in a way I'll come back to. But in private, in the specific geography of hotel rooms and late nights and the time between midnight check-ins and morning, something existed between us that had no name and needed none. He talked to me differently, told me things. About the sister, her name was Yuna, she wanted to study marine biology. She texted him photos of sea creatures she thought would disturb him, which he loved. About the career he'd almost had in another direction, something that required a different kind of courage than the one he'd developed. About the things he was afraid of, which he listed once, quietly, in the dark, in the specific tone of someone who doesn't admit fear often and needs the confession to happen without being witnessed too directly. And I told him things, real things. The model trains were only the beginning. I told him about the breakdown in Tokyo that got packaged as exhaustion, what it actually was, what preceded it, how I'd been running so empty for so long that something had finally given way and I'd sat on a floor in an airport and couldn't get up. I told him about my mother, about Dominic and the complicated mix of gratitude and suffocation I'd always felt inside that dynamic. About the ways fame had made certain things easier and certain things, the specific human things, the nearness of other people, the simple act of trusting someone, almost impossible. He listened, every time. That particular quality of his attention never diminished, never felt like performance. And that's what I come back to now. That's the thing that sits in the middle of my chest that I cannot resolve. Because if it was performance, it was the most sustained and committed and internally consistent performance I've ever encountered, better than anything I've ever done on a stage. And if it was real, then what we had was something true growing inside a constructed fiction, a genuine thing with false foundations, which is possibly the cruelest thing one person can do to another. Dominic noticed. I don't know exactly when or what gave it away, but approximately 3 weeks before the tour end, he pulled me aside after a show in Bangkok and said, very carefully, that he'd observed what seemed like a degree of personal attachment developing in my relationship with Kael, and that it was important to maintain professional clarity, and that emotional dependencies in those dynamics could create complications. I told him there was nothing to be concerned about. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he smiled. Not warmly, not as reassurance, just a smile that tracked slightly too slow, that had a quality of satisfaction underneath it that I couldn't name in the moment. Good, he said. That's good, Ren. I replayed that smile at 3 a.m. for weeks after Seoul. That was not a warning. That was a man confirming that what he'd designed was functioning exactly as intended. It was Mika who told me. Mika So, my choreographer. We'd known each other since I was 17 when she was a young assistant on my first tour, and I was a terrified kid from nowhere learning to inhabit a stage. She was the one person in my professional life who had never made me feel like a product. She was careful with me in the way that people are careful when they know what it costs to be careless. She called at 11 on a Wednesday night, 3 days before the final show. Ren, her voice was tight. I need you to hear me out before you react. Mika, what's going on? I've been looking into something for the past 2 weeks. I needed to be sure before I said anything. The first cold note of something settled in my chest. The letters, she said. The stalker, Ren. It was staged. The room didn't move. What do you mean staged? I mean there was no stalker. The letters were manufactured. The breach in Fukuoka, someone on the inside arranged. Someone with access to the venue layout, the security rotation, and the production billing. That's not... I stopped. Mika. He needed a reason, Mika said, to bring in outside security. Someone outside the existing team. Someone you didn't already know. Someone you'd come to trust from scratch. Someone he could control. How much did Kael know? I said. Silence. 3 seconds. 4. Mika! He was brought in by Dominic before you ever met him, given the scenario in advance, the letters, the threat assessment, the whole briefing. Something in my chest that I didn't have a word for went very quiet. He knew coming in, I said. He knew it wasn't real? She didn't deny it. Send me everything you found. Don't say anything to anyone yet. Just send it." I sat on the floor of my hotel room. I don't know how long. Long enough for the city sounds outside to thin out and change quality. Long enough to go through every memory I had of the past 4 months and examine it from the new angle. Every conversation, every gesture, the 2 a.m. walk in Osaka, the green room in Seoul and his voice and his face and just me. Manila. The dark and the warmth of him and the specific way he'd said don't stop like it cost him something to ask. I looked at all of it. And I couldn't tell. That's the thing that broke me. Not the anger. The anger came later, clean and useful and temporary. What broke me was that I couldn't tell. The whole architecture of what we'd built looked exactly the same from the inside, regardless of what I now knew. The feelings didn't come with a label that said manufactured here or grew here or started lying to you at this point. He knocked at midnight, exactly on time. I opened the door. He looked at my face, and he knew, immediately, instantly, in the way he always read me, that something had happened, something significant. "What's wrong?" he said. I stepped back. He came in. The room had that gravity it always had when he was in it, that particular shift in atmosphere, and I hated that it still felt that way, that my body hadn't gotten the news yet. I sat down on the couch. "Tell me about the letters," I said. He went very still. "Tell me, from the beginning, everything you knew and when you knew it." He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't say he didn't know what I was talking about. He stood there for a moment, and then he sat down, not across from me, but at the other end of the couch, facing me slightly. He put his hands on his knees and looked at them. Then he looked at me. "Dominic contacted me in September, before we'd ever met. He told me there was a credible escalating threat against you, a stalker with apparent access to your private information. He said you needed close personal protection outside the existing security structure." His voice was even, professional, the same register he'd used that first day in the conference room. I hated how much it hurt to hear him use that voice with me now. He gave me briefing materials, letters, a timeline, a threat assessment. It was detailed, credible. I had no reason to question it. "When did you find out?" I said. He stopped. "Month 2. I found a discrepancy in a postmark date. A letter supposedly sent from a city the production hadn't been in that week. I confronted Dominic privately." "And he told you?" "He said the threat was constructed to justify dedicated personal security. He said it was a protective measure, that you were showing signs of deteriorating well-being, and he needed a controlled arrangement without alarming you or the press." I looked at him for a long time. "And you believed that?" "I told myself I did," he said quietly, "for a while." "But you stayed." "Yes." "You knew for 2 months, Kael. 2 months. You knew the thing I was afraid of wasn't real, and you watched me be afraid of it. You watched me—" My voice wanted to break, and I held it down by force. "You were in Manila. You know what happened in Manila. You knew the whole time in Manila, and you didn't—" "I know." His voice was rough now. The composure was gone. "I know, Ren." "Why?" The words sat between us. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, without looking away from me, he said, "Because by month 2, I wasn't there for Dominic anymore. I wasn't doing the job he'd arranged. I was there because somewhere between Osaka and Seoul and every night in between, what I felt for you stopped being something I could categorize as professional or managed or contained." He stopped. swallowed. I was there because I wanted to be there, because... He stopped again. Do you love me? Not tenderly, not as a hope, as a question with a required answer, asked directly because I needed to hear it spoken out loud in this room with everything stripped away. He held my gaze. Yes, he said. The word filled the room and didn't move. Is that supposed to help me? I said. He didn't answer. Because there was no answer. We both knew that. I stood up, went to the wardrobe and took out my overnight bag, started folding things into it without thinking about what I was choosing. He stayed on the couch. I could feel him watching me. Ren? I kept packing. Ren, please, say something. Tell me how angry you are. Tell me it was unforgivable. Tell me you hate me. Yell at me. Do something. I zipped the bag, picked it up, walked to the door, and stopped with my hand on the frame. The room behind me was quiet. He wasn't moving. I could feel the weight of his attention on my back, that specific quality of it that I'd come to know better than almost anything else in the world, and I understood with a cold clarity that I would know it for the rest of my life, that it would live in me somewhere unreachable and permanent, regardless of what I did next. I don't hate you, Kael, I said. A pause. That's the problem. And I walked out. The final Soul show happened 2 nights later. I performed all 22 songs. I hit every note. I smiled at 12,000 people and held the microphone up at the end and let their voices fill the arena. And when the lights went down, I walked off stage and sat in the empty green room by myself for 40 minutes and didn't cry. Felt nothing. Or not nothing, something that had no name yet. The specific emotional state that exists when something enormous has happened and your body has decided to defer the processing until it can find a quieter time. Dominic was removed from my management team within a week. I gave Mika's documentation to my lawyer and told her to make it clean and quiet. No police, no public statement, no industry spectacle. He left without a conversation. I thought I'd feel something about that, some satisfaction or grief for the years or rage at the audacity. Mostly I just felt tired. Kael was relieved of the assignment the same day. My assistant handled the communication. I didn't trust my own register for that conversation. Didn't trust that I could say the correct professional things without saying something else entirely. He tried to reach me 3 times. A text, 3 days after Soul. He said he understood if silence was all I could give him. He said he wasn't writing to ask for anything. He said he hoped the insomnia was better. That particular detail, the insomnia, the lamp, the specific small thing he'd learned about me in the earliest days before I'd understood what was happening, that particular detail sat in my chest for a long time. A voicemail, a week later. I listened to it standing in my kitchen at 7 a.m. with the phone pressed to my ear and my eyes closed. He said my name at the beginning and the end, and in between he was quiet for a moment in the way that people are quiet when they've been searching for the right words and haven't fully found them. He said he understood that the kind of trust he'd broken wasn't something he had any right to ask me to rebuild. He said he'd watched the 2nd episode of the Deep Ocean documentary alone, and it hadn't been the same. He said Yuna had asked about me, that he had apparently mentioned me to his sister somewhere along the way, which was the kind of detail that pressed on something I wished it didn't press on. I didn't call back. A letter arrived a month later, handwritten. 3 pages, small and careful. No return address, but my assistant recognized the handwriting. I still have it. It lives on my kitchen table. I've read the first line, just the first line, standing over it at 2 a.m. in the grip of the particular loneliness that only comes after something specific has been lost. Not general loneliness, not the industry loneliness I've always known, but the pointed, personal kind that knows exactly what it's missing. Ren, I don't ask for forgiveness. I just need you to know that somewhere in the middle of a lie, what I felt for you became the only true thing in my life." I put it back in the envelope. I haven't turned the page. Here's the thing I keep circling back to, the question I can't resolve and can't put down. He found out in month 2. I fell in love with him somewhere in month 3. So between those 2 points, somewhere in the stretch of time between his knowing and my falling, something was real. Has to have been. The feelings I had were mine. The nights were mine. The panic attack in Seoul and his voice on the floor of that green room and the way he said, "Just my face, nothing else, just this," that felt real. Manila felt real. The way he touched me like he was paying attention to every detail. The way he exhaled against my hair like he was setting something down. The way I slept without the lamp on for the first time in 4 years. That felt real. But here's the problem with real when it lives inside something manufactured. How do you go back and find the exact moment something shifted from performance to truth? How do you identify which gestures were professional obligation and which were genuine reflex? How do you trace the line between the role he was playing and the person he became while playing it? He says somewhere in the middle of a lie it became real. But I was inside that lie. I didn't get to choose the middle. The middle was determined by him and by Dominic and by a plan designed before I'd ever shaken his hand in that conference room. I built something real on a foundation I didn't know was false. And what do you do with what you built? Where does it go? Do you tear it down because the ground beneath it was a lie? Or do you grieve it as something genuine that existed despite everything that surrounded it? I don't know. I've turned that question over for months now, and I don't know. I know that the fear was manufactured, and the safety he gave me in response to it was, at least initially, part of a design. I know that the person who sat on the floor of a green room in Seoul and talked about bioluminescence until I could breathe again, I don't know what he was then. I don't know what category to put him in. Hero or performance? Real or constructed? Both, possibly. Both at once. That might be the answer. That it was both. That those things are not mutually exclusive in the way I keep wanting them to be. That a person can be doing something wrong and feeling something true at the same time. That love and betrayal are not opposites. That sometimes they are the exact same thing wearing different faces. I sit with this in the evenings now in the specific quiet of an apartment that has started to feel like mine again. I'm working on new music. My new management team is careful and transparent in ways Dominic never was, and I notice and appreciate every instance of it. Mika comes over on Thursdays. We eat takeout on the floor, and she doesn't bring him up, and I don't bring him up, and both of us are aware of the shape of the thing we're not mentioning. The letter is still on my kitchen table. I've thought about reading the rest of it probably 100 times, always at night, always in the particular hours when the city goes quiet and there's nothing between me and my own thoughts. I keep not doing it, not because I don't want to know what it says, because I'm afraid that whatever it says will make things harder, not easier, will give me more to hold without giving me any more ground to stand on, will be another true thing inside a constructed frame, and I don't know what to do with any more of those. But sometimes, some nights, I stand over that envelope and I think about the vending machine in Osaka, and the bad canned coffee, and the anglerfish. I think about his voice in the dark. I think about Manila, and sleeping without the lamp on for the first time in 4 years. And I think, maybe someday, I'll be ready to know. Maybe someday the question won't feel like a wound. But not yet. Not yet.
Appreciate you watching. Hit subscribe, like, and share. See you in the next story.